They have a. I'm just looking at my monitor up on the screen, and I'll get to my first telephone caller of this hour in just a moment. But I'm looking at my monitor. The New York Stock Exchange is open today, but they're still trying to figure out exactly what happened yesterday. And you keep hearing, well, there's no indication. Would they reveal it if it was that vulnerable? They would reveal that because you could bring down the country, so to speak, in this manner. Would they be willing to come out and say, well, yeah, someone hacked in and they can do it anytime? I want to talk about that a little later in the program, but in the meantime, I want to get back to the telephones briefly. 70 at 907, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. We have a caller with us right off the start of the second hour. You're on the air.
Morning.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm a Roman Catholic, and of course in our church we go along with God's will, and His will was for men and women in marriage. And we actually have a prayer that says, your will, not ours. And it seems like some people want to do their will and not God's. I've often wondered, because we can't judge, the last final judgment will be up to God. But stand before God, God will go, did you do my will? Well, no, we wanted to change a few things, God, And it's going to be very interesting, I think, for some people standing in front of God saying, well, God, yeah, I allowed something that you created in your image to die while I stood up for a dumb animal that you put us dominion over. I mean, it just blows my mind.
Well, I'm thinking, too, about, some comments about the fact that you've got people who lead people astray will actually have a lot more to answer for. Your politicians.
Correct.
Think about that. The elected officials. You take people like Nancy Pelosi. She's a Roman Catholic. John Kerry's a Roman Catholic. Joe Biden is a Roman Catholic.
If you actually look at it, they're not practicing their faith, though.
Right. They're bringing grave scandal to the church.
Right. They say they are, but they're not. And like that one caller called in earlier, they're more concerned about them and getting reelected and doing what's good for a minority instead of majority. And this country was based on a majority, not a minority.
And here's a question, and maybe it's rhetorical, but when they get to the gates of heaven, and then they are asked why they did this, even though they knew better, and they say, "Well, I had to get elected." Do you think that that's going to go over as an excuse?
No, I think he kind of pictures mine. There's a trap door there, and God grabs the lever and goes, "Well, you're elected to this."
It reminds me. Reminds me of that movie. What was it called about the spy, Austin Powers, where Dr. Evil flips a switch and Will Ferrell's character goes falling backwards into a pit with flames?
Yeah. Well, and you're right. Our priest says, most priests will go to jail because they follow God's will, not man's will.
And we're going to need that to happen. We're going to need that to happen.
Yeah, they will not marry same-sex couples. And I have nothing against homosexuals if they feel that way, but to try and change something that was ordained and manifested by God, this country is headed downward because people say, well, no one can overrun this country. God can say this country is going to fall, and He can create whatever He wants, whether it's internal, external, whatever. You can't stop the power of God.
And I thank you much for the telephone call. I had a message from a friend this morning who's a very devout Roman Catholic, and he was telling me, he said that if you look back on the punishment of Sodom and Gomorrah, if I can find his message, he said it wasn't necessarily about the act, and he was going through this, and he says, I'm working on a piece now, drawing the parallel between Sodom and today. The sin of Sodom wasn't so much homosexuality, but the forcing of it on others. And that would mean, of course, forcing people to concede to it, whether they be clergy or whether they be people working in government, issuing licenses. First of all, government shouldn't be in this business at all. It just, the notion that you need to get a license to be with someone else it seems to me to be un-American in the first place. It certainly wasn't what our founding fathers envisioned when they created this country. But we're all on the forge, so to speak, right now, and the question is going to become, because it is going to get very nasty out there, and I think that we're going to have some economic troubles. Look, this morning it is said the Chinese stock market finally rallied after dropping for 3 weeks. Well, it rallied, but is that a permanent thing? There might be systemic issues there that mean it's going to continue its slide at some point, and it's going to be very nasty when it does. It's going to swamp a lot of smaller boats when it goes down. You see what's happening in places like Puerto Rico and Greece. I mean, the parallels right now, when you think about, from a Christian viewpoint, a book of Revelation, you see these things going on, and then you see what's going on socially within this country, with the culture, and in Europe. And you see that, you remember that the Babylonian captivity, Europe may be experiencing that now with the Muslim invasion, as we were talking about in the last segment of the program, and the fact that the Christians, well, post-Christians, a lot of them they don't believe they're Christians any longer. They're depopulating themselves. But the other guys are having children in record numbers. You do the math. So, we're looking at something in that sense. And liberals don't get this. Right after 9/11, I believe it was Pat Robertson was having a conversation with Jerry Falwell, and they were chatting on the 700 Club about 9/11, and just, they were terribly upset by the tragedy, as everyone else was. And they made a comment that, that we could be seeing a message from God here. And liberals went crazy. How dare they say that? Just because a lot of people in New York City, live like a bunch of animals, how could they dare say that? That's not nice. God wouldn't do that. No, what they said was, and if you understand your faith, is that God removes his protection from people who no longer have a use for him. And not her, by the way, him. And if you look back, especially in the Old Testament, it's filled with those stories. It's filled with, and I have a friend, he's a Roman Catholic priest, and he says, by golly, I agree with those two. But the left didn't understand that. And as far as leftist politicians and lefties saying that, well, we can get away with this and we can get a few votes, because they don't really believe. Let's be honest. They don't really believe. 9:14, Bill Colley with you this morning. It's 71. You're listening to News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And you're next on Top Story.
Yeah, Bill, I remember that day very distinctly, and when Pat Robertson and Jerry Falwell said that, and I don't agree with it unless I remember it wrong. I believe that free will, I think that a blessing comes to a person through interaction with his fellow man. I don't think that there is such a righteous person on earth that God says, Bill Colley, you're such a righteous man that I'm going to literally take all of any kind of buffeting from any kind of detraction from your life, and you're going to go through life without anything because you're such a good man. You see, I don't know where free will ends and divine intervention begins, but I think that literally as we turn away from God, turn away from faith in our fellow man, I believe that's where our blessings come from. There's opportunities come to us every day, and whether or not we're aware of them or up for the occasion or whatever the case may be, we can literally change our lives through the opportunities that are provided for us through interaction with our fellow man. And I don't believe that God took away any protections from America and blessings. I know that this is just my opinion, but I'll hang up now.
Sure, and thank you much for chiming in. I've got another caller on the other side of that too as well, and you're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Got another caller.
Yeah, good morning, Dale.
Yes.
Founding Father George Mason, he was considered the father of the Bill of Rights, said that, I'm not paraphrasing, but he said that if this country ever quit worshiping Jesus as the Lord of the land, and Providence, meaning God, would punish us with national calamities. And we can't with extreme weather we're having in all over the country, the record floods, record drought in the same nation, at the same time. So, throughout history, God's protective hand, as you said earlier, is withdrawn when the people become wicked. And it's just a fact of life. And until we get back to the roots that made this country great, and our founding fathers were all mostly Christians. They weren't deists, as the revisionist history people tell us. And so this country is founded on Christian principles until the Warren Supreme Court in 1962-63 took prayer and Bible reading out of our public schools, and we've been on a downward slide ever since.
By the way, I have been to the George Mason estate. I was at a wedding. A friend of mine was married there. It was about 98 degrees. We were in black tuxedos. I was in the wedding party, and I decided to skip a T-shirt because it was so hot, and the metal buttons on the tuxedo got very hot. It was very uncomfortable, and they have a visitor center, which is air conditioning, and when the wedding service was done and they moved us into the cooler building, the visitor center, I was probably happier or more pleased with God than ever before that he brought me relief.
No kidding. Well, this country, we're going to continue to be punished as long as we keep going down this road of the gay marriage and all of the wickedness that's going out there, the millions of abortions that's happening here. I mean, God is not happy, and he's showing it with all the destruction that's coming at us every day, and people wake up.
And, people can say there's a lot of reasons that the U.S. economy now is going to be, or has been, or will be quickly surpassed by the Chinese, and that we've had all of these issues happen in this country. But maybe if you look back about the time that we started losing it economically, we'll go back 45, 50 years, if you will, and, people didn't notice it right away. But it also coincides with a change in the social structure in this country, the rise of the hippies and so many other social ills came about at the very same time.
Yeah, we had no trade deficit in the early 60s, zero. And now it's $500 billion a year and probably more. That's what's on the books, but I'm sure it's worse than that. But as long as we, basically mock God, he will not protect us.
Thank you much for the call. And I see a lot of people out there hear that, and they say, oh, come on now. God's my friend. He pats me on the head and he bought me a new car. No, that's Joel Osteen. That's not God. And Joel Osteen is a snake oil salesman. Let's get that right out of the way right now. When I hear him being interviewed on NPR and the hosts on National Palestinian Radio treating with kid gloves, then I know what he's all about. But the fact of the matter is a lot of people out there just don't seem to realize if you are a person of faith, you're asked a great deal. And it's just not going along hoping that your friend will constantly reward you. When I was really getting in touch with my faith many, many years ago, because when I was young, come on. But I remember a friend of mine, he said to me, it's not about what God can do for you, but about what you can do for him. I had to sit back for a minute and say, whoa, I'd never thought of that. Or at least I hadn't given it much thought. 20 minutes after 9 o'clock. Hey, speaking of Wall Street, I got a couple of thoughts on that coming up in a few minutes. Hope you can stick around. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. Driving into work this morning, I realized, here we are already getting close to the middle of July, and that means, well, really, over the last couple of weeks, the days have been getting shorter because the longest day of the year with the amount of sunshine was a couple of weeks back in June. But all of that summer sunshine, all of those increased hours of sunshine mean that you've got more sun pouring through the windows of your office, your home, or your car, and that means that you're going to see some fade of some of the fabrics on your furniture, your carpet, your drapes. So we've been advising you, if you have issues with that, to give the folks at Tint Lady a call. And they do tinting for both office, home, and auto, and they'll do free estimates. You give them a call, they'll come out, they'll take a look at the situation, and they'll come up with a number for you. 736-8469, or you can reach them online at tintladyidaho.com. Locally owned and operated. They've been in business now more than 20 years. Don't squint, get tint. And I'd like to remind people, too, they have a location. You could also drop by 1887 Highland Avenue East in Twin Falls. If you're driving a car or a truck and you want to drop by, I think that's probably would save them the travel to come take a look at that. Of course, if it's a home or a business, they'd likely come out and actually make the trip themselves. Hours Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., Saturday by appointment only, and closed on Sundays. So this morning it appears that Wall Street has rebounded somewhat after what you might call a glitch yesterday. A glitch might be a nice way to put that. And there's been a lot of debate. People in government are saying, no, 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 this was not terrorism or somebody screwing around with our computer system. No, not at all. And despite the fact that, you had multiple other occurrences, similar type of occurrences going on in the country at the same time, and the Chinese stock market had been in free fall. No, there's nothing to see here. Please move along, move along. This is Trace Gallagher, appearing on the Kelley File on Fox News last night. Trace Gallagher is a reporter there, trying to explain some of the events of the day.
And a famous investigator once said, where some people see coincidence, I see conspiracy. And today's trifecta of technical glitches even had the top Democrat on the Senate Cybersecurity Committee acknowledging the incidents had the appearance of a cyber attack. It began at 8 a.m. Eastern when United Airlines experienced what it called a network connectivity problem. That grounded all the company's planes for more than an hour. 11:32 Eastern, the New York Stock Exchange halted trading because of technical issues. 13 minutes later, the Wall Street Journal's homepage stopped working. Many believe the journal knockout was the result of people flooding its website in response to the NYSE outage. Still, the back-to-back-to-back problems got the attention of everyone from the president to the FBI. Listen.
But it looks, again, in my business, you don't love coincidences, but it does appear that there is not a cyber intrusion involved.
Homeland Security echoed that, saying there is no sign of malicious activity.
Okay, so no sign of malicious activity. The night before, and Drudge is headlining this today, the night before, this fellow who calls himself Anonymous, who's somewhat of an infamous hacker, posted something on his Twitter feed and foreshadowing that there might be problems on Wall Street the following day. Do you think perhaps that we might take a closer look at all of that? Also, you've got this group called ISIS, which is threatening to strike us on our shores. They're threatening to strike people all over the world. Right now I take a libertarian view that says, gee, I don't know that we should go over there and crush them. Maybe we should let the different factions over there fight amongst themselves and get rid of each other. On the other hand, when they're talking about attacking us, and if they were responsible for something like this, because they could well have been, they've been threatening for the last couple of weeks something big. They were saying Independence Day weekend. Maybe they got a late start. Maybe they were thinking Bastille Day and they're sort of cutting the difference in between. Or maybe it was the Chinese who've already proved that they can break into corporate websites here or corporate files here, and they can break into government files here, which is an act of war, but which is being ignored by the President of the United States. So why is there this hush-hush? Is it because we just don't have systems in place and they're afraid to admit that because it might be an admission and then bring on more of this? You're on the air with Bill Colley. It's 9:28.
Yeah, Bill. Even if what would they do anyways? What if China came out today and said, yeah, that was us? What are they going to do about it? So we've already seen how they responded before. It's just kind of like, oh, well, shoot. Golly, I guess,
Don't do that. I told you, don't do it again.
Bill, Mitt Romney, they laughed him under the bus. I know I wasn't a Romney fan, but they laughed him under the bus for his stance he took on China and Russia. And, boy, wouldn't you feel better if you had him right now?
Absolutely. I'd actually feel really good if we had Alan West. I'm going to share some comments from him on some of these things in just a few minutes. Colonel West was appearing on Brian Kilmeade's show on Fox Radio, and he had some rather pointed comments that he made. I love that guy. I have a friend in California, and she's very involved in the conservative movement. In fact, she wants to move to Idaho because she thinks it's the most conservative place in America. But she doesn't like Alan West. She says, oh, he's a sunshine patriot. She said, I could tell you some things that I know. And I thought, well, wait a minute. He was in the middle of a dadgum war zone, and he got in trouble because he ended a terrorist streak in the war zone. And he took some action that would be considered almost Patton-esque. I don't think he's a sunshine patriot at all. In fact, this country needs a good ass kicking, if you will. I mean, I don't like to talk like that normally, but he'd be the guy to give it. and you know what? If he'd be willing to give it here, he'd be willing to give it to somebody else. If you had a President Alan West, none of this stuff would be going on. People would be going, oh, yes, sir, yes, sir. And I'm talking about the Chinese and Russian ambassadors. They'd be kowtowing to him. I've got more coming up, including some comments from the Colonel in just a short while. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Oh, this is wonderful. Here's the story on a friend of mine just sent me. New York man travels to Florida to behead TV host in the name of Allah. I'll tell you what. I don't reveal my firearms use and ownership on the air but I'm just telling people, if you think someday you're going to try to pull an Alan Berg on me, you better be prepared and pack your lunch. But here you go again. You've got these kooks who are roaming over the country, and all it takes is one. Hey, on a lighter note, much lighter note, Benito Baeza and I are going to be doing an appearance coming up. I think it's a week from Monday, and it's for a very, very good cause. Hundreds of Magic Valley children struggle with being able to afford essential school supplies, but you can help. We're trading Big Macs for backpacks at McCash for Kids 2015. Take your family to dinner at any Twin Falls or Buell McDonald's on July 20th between 5 and 8 p.m. The more we eat, the more money McDonald's will donate to South Central Community Action Partnership. All Magic Valley McDonald's will donate 25% of their proceeds during the event. All 4 Town Square Media Twin Falls radio stations are going to be broadcasting at the various McDonald's. Benito and I are going to be at the McDonald's on Pole Line Road in Twin Falls. The Cash for Kids is made possible by Smiles for Kids, Lambert's Truck Center, Filer Mutual Telephone, Jack's Tire and Oil, South Central Public Health District, Agri-Service, Clearwater Power Equipment, Brazil Heating and Air Conditioning, Braces R Us, Sunshine Kids, Child Care and Preschool, as well as South Central Community Action Partnership and Magic Valley McDonald's. Looking forward to that because I think that I can out-eat Benito, when it comes to French fries and possibly even burgers, fish, and chicken. 8:35, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I wanted to share this. This is Lieutenant Colonel Alan West joining Brian Kilmeade on Kilmeade's Fox radio show. They're having a discussion about President Obama when he talked about how we're going to deal with ISIS by giving them better ideas. We're going to tell them they need to have same-sex marriage, abortions, and heart disease, and they'll end up seeing the evil of their ways, and then they'll join the Western world. He said something like that. He was going to show them better ideas, borrowing from the Ford Motor Company. Except the next day, one of his assistants stepped out in front of a congressional panel and said something along the lines of, well, you know what? We've actually only trained 60 people to fight them. So ideas are really all they have so far. And this is West's response to that.
Pretty shameful that he did not make that announcement when he could have had the opportunity at the Pentagon press conference, and it came out during the hearing with Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dempsey. But think about the message that sends right now. If I'm Iran and we're going through the kabuki dance of this nuclear negotiations, we don't seem to have a credible military threat or an advantage. And so that is something that they understand is strength and might. And so they believe that they have the upper hand. When you think about what is going on with Vladimir Putin and the fact that he called President Obama on the 4th of July at the same time while Russian bombers were flying just outside of our international airspace and waters along the coast of California, Alaska. This is a horrible message to send, as you say, when the despots, theocrats, autocrats, and dictators of the world are looking at an advantage and a gain and an upper hand against us.
And of course, if the Chinese raid your computer system in an act of war and steal all the details and you don't do anything about it, then they think you're weak. If the Russians buzz the California coast with their fighters, you don't do anything about it but chat with the president of Russia on the telephone. Oh, Vladimir, it's good to hear from you. Are you shooting off fireworks? Ha, ha, ha. Again, he has no respect for you. The Iranians have no respect. And in this case, ISIS has no respect because they hear these things coming out of his mouth. Eric Erickson took it even a bit more. He's the editor of RedState.com, and he says he's talking about the time Roosevelt talked better ideas with Adolf Hitler. We're being a little facetious here. Roosevelt rolled his wheelchair into Germany and debated Adolf Hitler. At the end of the debate, the Germans smacked themselves upside the head, recognized the error of their ways, and laid down their arms. And then he writes, that must be why Barack Obama went to the Pentagon yesterday and declared, of course he's writing this a couple of days ago, quote, in order for us to defeat terrorist groups like ISIL and Al-Qaeda, we must discredit their ideology. This broader challenge of countering violent extremism ideologies are not defeated with guns. They are defeated with better ideas. Michael Medved, who's a writer and a talk show host and a Hollywood guy, if some of you know who he is, had a column about 10 years ago, and he was questioned by someone who told him, "You never solve anything by violence." And he said, "Well, violence solved Adolf Hitler and Tojo, and it solved Saddam Hussein, and we could have solved even more if we decided to stick with it, and we didn't do, the fight with one hand tied behind our back. And if we had followed Stanley McChrystal's views and left him in charge, even though, but he criticized the wimp in chief." Yes, he did, and deservedly so. And unfortunately, we got stuck with some other people in that mission after that, and the result is the bad guys may come back. Look, maybe there are certain things we shouldn't be involved with around the world, but once we're involved, we dang well better finish it. Bill Colley with you, 20 minutes away from 10 o'clock. Got a couple of other items I wanted to mention before we wrap up the program today. Do you do your own automobile repairs? It is increasingly difficult to do that, and has been for about 30 years. And now the large automobile makers are trying to prohibit you from actually doing your own repairs. We'll tell you why coming up in a few minutes. It's been a long time since I could just go out into the garage with a ratchet set and start my work, and I don't know enough about computers today to do it at all. There was a time when I was younger, and I got to admit, automobile repair was never my strong suit, which, growing up in my family, I was sort of the outlier. My father, of course, everything he learned about repairing automobiles back in the Depression, in the war years, you didn't have a lot of choice because you just couldn't go out and continually, 2 years later, I'll just go swap it for a new one. You couldn't, no one had any money. So you were driving around in old automobiles that, on a wing and a prayer, and you needed a lot of experience when it came to automobile repair. Of course, it was simpler then, too. Engines have changed dramatically, and the whole operating system has changed dramatically with automobiles. And then, of course, the U.S. Army taught him how to repair tanks and Jeeps and other, large equipment. They were running recon, and they had to do that. And you were constantly working on repairing vehicles that had been banged up, dinged up, blown up, whatever. And so he had great experience at that. And my uncle was the same way. Even though he'd been in the Signal Corps, he was used to fixing radios instead. But they could do this work on their own and just do it like it was second nature. And I struggled a bit more with it. I mean, I worked alongside my dad on a lot of repairs and the like, but I usually ended up with my knuckles all cut and scraped. And that was how I viewed automobile repair. But I have a lot of friends who just loved doing it, and they loved the tinkering part of it. See, I can look at a beautiful car and say, I'd like to drive that, but I don't necessarily want to fix it. And yet I know people out there that they love every bit of it. In fact, they blow off steam that way. Wall Street Journal, headline, automakers try to stop the gearheads. It says, do you own the car that you bought and paid for? Think about that for a moment. I have a car. I paid it off a long time ago, and it's sitting out in the parking lot here. But it says you do not really own all of it. At least that's what the automakers are asserting to the U.S. Copyright Office. Now, you got to be questioning, why is that? Tinkerers, aftermarket repair shops, and copyright activists are lobbying for an exemption to the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, they call it DMCA for short, of 1998 to guarantee car owners the right to alter the software in their vehicles. Dozens of electronic control units in modern cars regulate emissions, steering, and other aspects of automotive performance. The nonprofit Electronic Frontier Foundation and the American Automobile Association, speaking for car owners, back the exemption, as do security researchers who want to probe auto software for vulnerabilities. Ford, GM, Toyota, and other major car makers are adamantly opposed. Gee willikers, I wonder why. Do you realize what this could do? This could put out of business all of those independent repair shops. I remember when I bought the Jeep, and they gave me a coupon to come back for the first oil change, but then they wanted to do a look-through for $120, and I said, wait a minute. Well, they said, this is your 90-day checkup. Well, isn't that part of the purchase? No, that's not you want $120 for me to drive in. You'll do the oil change, which is going to be a nominal figure, and then you want me to pay you $120. But yeah. What do you mean your visual check? It's brand new. It's 3 months old. Why do you need to do this visual check for $120? At 3 months old, it should be fine, right? Well, unless I drive it into a tree, I understand that. But they'd like you to keep coming back. As a friend of mine who sold Toyotas years ago told me, he said, we didn't make our money on selling you the automobile. There's not that much of a markup. We make the money on the service calls afterward. That's where there's the money being made by the business. So I understand that, and I'm sympathetic to that and all. But if you go through with this and you eliminate this, that means you can't even work on your own automobile in your own garage. Not that they're going to find out, but if you someday have to go back to the dealer and they look at, say, you've changed a couple of things and bypassed the software here. Here's the government agent. He's going to have to take you away. Is that what we're talking about? Because you could be guilty of a crime, right? For fixing your own automobile if you bypass that. It's no different than when somebody comes along and says, these hybrid seeds that blew on your land and are growing over there, it's mine. And if you harvest those, you're in trouble. We've gotten into a lot of these arguments over the years, but you understand, too, as well, the notion, the people who actually do the intellectual property, they're trying to promote or protect that, too, from the automobile industry, with good reason as well. And the safety experts on the other side are saying, well, we want to make sure that the software works. Consumer Reports and some of those people would like to be able to report on that and tell you how it goes. But the independent guy who has been fixing automobiles for years, and when we went to the computerized systems, had to go out and buy all sorts of diagnostic equipment, he's much more like a doctor now than he ever was a repairman because of all that equipment. I had a friend, he lived 2 blocks away. I used to go over and have him work on my old Plymouth. And I can recall when I would go into his shop in the early days, he had all the usual tools there. And when I went back after a couple of years of being away, I'd moved out of town for a while and came back. I went in, and lo and behold, he's got all of these computer monitors all over so he can do all of his diagnostic tests. And I said, what'd that cost you? And he just rolled his eyes and said, don't ask. Well, we're looking to put those people out of business now and say that they shouldn't be able to handle this software because they could do something that indeed could alter it. And this is the brave new world we live in. We're coming up on 10 minutes away from 10 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And in just a couple of seconds, we'll have Mike Gallagher. Gallagher is brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls, 736-6563. I was thinking about his comments that the White House would like to start putting solar panels on low-income houses. Well, some people are going even beyond that. It's 9:54. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310. KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Just a few minutes left in the program today, and then we're on to Rush Limbaugh following Fox News after 10 o'clock, and Sean Hannity following the news at 1 o'clock. The Glenn Beck program, sans Beck for the next few weeks. That's just after 4 o'clock news, and Dave Ramsey tonight. This is from Washington Examiner. Bernie Sanders wants to spend $3 billion on solar panels for the poor. Where do they think all of this money's coming from? Democratic presidential candidate and Bernie Sanders, the independent senator from Vermont, proposed legislation this week that would spend $3 billion on solar panels for the poor. His bill, the Low Income Solar Act, I'm sorry, but the names that the Low Income Solar Act, it sounds like something straight out of a science fiction movie, is similar to legislation he's proposed prior in Congress, but his latest proposal as a presidential candidate shows he's dead set on pursuing huge programs that intersect with his support for publicly funded infrastructure, environmental preservation, and helping people in the lower income brackets. Sanders offered his legislation on the same day the White House put forward a plan to build its solar panels on federally subsidized housing. Now, of course, the rich have been getting away with this for a long time because if you wanted solar panels, the government would say, all right, you go pay for the solar panels and we'll reimburse you for half the cost. And the cost was astronomical. So no poor person or no middle-class person could afford them. But if you already had money, the government said, well, here's some welfare for you. We'll buy half the set for you. And meanwhile, these things are not in some parts of the country. If you were living in Seattle, do you really want solar panels? How often does the sun shine there? I used to live in a city that was the second cloudiest city behind Seattle many, many years ago. And I can remember that we just had no use for these types of things because there was no sunshine. And in fact, they may be very nice and they may add a little bit, but by the time, when you look at the overall cost of these things, and everyone's, well, yes, but the cost has come down. It has come down. It's a little bit like saying I'm just only a little bit pregnant. It hasn't come down a whole lot compared to what you're actually getting out of it. Cost-benefit analysis would say, heck, even Bill Gates is saying that these things, these highfalutin ideas about alternative energies just can't be done yet. And you know what we can do, though? We can put coal workers back on the job in West Virginia and Kentucky and in Montana. And we can keep going for the natural gas that's available, in some places still banned where they can't go fracking. My poor little hometown in the very northern reaches of the Allegheny Mountains, which spill over from Pennsylvania into New York State, in the southwestern corner of New York State, my hometown is living out the Great Depression all over again and has been for 30 years. And yet, lo and behold, I'm going to stop using that word today. I'm sounding more and more Moses every day. Well, my beard is gray. But more and more, you're hearing people talking about how we have to go and get the energy that is available to us and that we're going to simply need it to move this economy along. It's that fracking boom, for instance, that has really kept us out of a total depression. But my hometown, which was a beautiful place to grow up, 30 years ago, the old factories all closed down and moved out of the area. Well, here you go. They need something, and they're not allowed to go get the natural gas that sits beneath the ground in massive quantities, which would put people back to work, which would allow them to finally paint their houses again, which are in desperate need of paint, new shingles and the like, and would help the tax base so they could afford to pave the streets a little bit more often. But nope. The environmental wackos keep saying, oh, solar panels. It's a little bit like the Kelvins in Star Trek. They walked around with a little Pez dispensers eating pills. This is the only nutrition I need every day. Well, then Mr. Scott went out and got them all soused on whiskey, and it changed their tune. Not recommending that either, by the way. God willing, if the creek don't rise, I get to do this all over again tomorrow. Bill Colley with you. Hope to be here again Friday morning between 8 and 10 o'clock in the morning. On News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And God willing, again, I hope to be back. We'll see, though.